But maybe after I listen tonight, I'll come meet with you. That would be great.
Oh, there you go.
And I can take my walk. One lifesaver can get him a half out and back.
That's a good way to calculate, right?
Yeah.
It's a lifesaver
You know,
too.
bite it and chew it on top, you know?
Sparks flying.
Nathan.
Am I waiting for the new agenda to go? Ooh. Thank you and welcome to the Monomoy Regional School Committee's public hearing for the Monomoy Regional School District fiscal year 2021 budget presentation. I'd like to call the meeting to order at 6 o'clock on Tuesday evening, February 11th at 2020. At this time, we would like to give the public an opportunity to come up and discuss or have comments regarding the 2021 budget. We ask the speakers to try and limit their comments to 5 minutes each, and unless additional time is required. Is there anyone who'd like to speak at this time? Seeing none, we will move on to Dr. Carpenter with the FY21 budget presentation.
So thank you. I'd like to just start by saying that there's a little sadness with this budget presentation in that this is the 6th time that I've been doing a public hearing, and there are some teams that are just tough to break up, like Pat Sajak and Vanna White, and you know, I've been blessed to put together budgets for the school district for the last 6 years with Katie Isernio, our business manager, who will be retiring at the end of this year. And so I just want to at least go into this presentation just thanking her immensely for what she has done behind the scenes to support good fiscal stewardship of the school district and the taxpayers' money. So as we go into the budget conversation, I talked at both select boards in the past couple of weeks when we were going there about some of the wonderful highlights of our district, and there's so much that we can celebrate about our schools. Just a few weeks ago, we had the Chatham Elementary School teachers in here, talking about this project that they were doing on deep learning. They've got a new playground there that's been supported by CPC funds in Chatham. Harwich Elementary School was one of the top-rated elementary schools on Cape Cod according to the accountability ratings, and they've got a new elementary school playground on the horizon with the support of their CPC and pending support at town meeting. Our middle school's the highest-rated middle school on the Cape, and they've been doing a wonderful job of using map data to support an enrichment program during a seminar block each day that allows students to get the supports that they need, but also to explore their passions. And one of the things that I think is most impressive about our middle school, if you go at 7:15 in the morning, you're going to see cars pulling up a half an hour before school with so many before school activities happening there, and the same things happening in the afternoon. There's just so much happening that's extending the day for our tweens in our two communities. And then we have the high school, which I think is really become in the state one of the exemplars of a high school in terms of school culture, where we use the Jocelyn Block to support students' academic success along with providing enrichment activities for them. We've got a growing AP and Global Studies program, but we also just have a wonderfully vibrant academic, athletic, and extracurricular program at the school, and it's a high school that really has focused on ways to support all types of learners, but particularly those who struggle. In terms of our budget, looking at it from a high-level perspective, this is a level-staffed budget. While it is level-staffed, we will be shifting some staffing from the elementary level to the high school. We're going to see more and more students over the next several years reaching our high school. The current bubble of enrollment is at the 7th grade. That will be reaching 8th grade at the high school, so we want to have a little bit of staffing follow it. So we'll see 1 FTE of staffing resources moving from the elementary level to the high school in this budget year. The budget maintains all existing services and programs. And because of a declining number of children in Chatham relative to the town of Harwich, we continue to see a shift in minimum required contribution. That's a number that's calculated by the state, which ultimately shifts costs towards the town of Harwich. In terms of state aid is the funding that comes from the state government to support education in the state. The state aid has a rather complex Chapter 70 formula, but really parts of that formula look at how many students do you have in each town to determine part of that minimum required contribution. But there are also wealth factors that are calculated in there. So both of our towns would be considered as relatively wealthy towns, but that wealth is largely in the land and the property values in our two towns. The other half of the wealth factor that the state calculates is what's the income wealth that individuals are seeing in those two towns, and that's an area that particularly those on the school side, we're seeing more and more of our families that are struggling on that side. So there are towns that are blessed on one side of this Chapter 70 equation with property wealth, but the year-round folks that live here, many of them, as we know, struggle financially, and some more so seasonally. In terms of the state aid trends, the slide here has state aid, which is our state aid would be the green line, increasing over the last several years. But you'll notice in the last couple years, state aid across Massachusetts has increased at a greater rate than what we're seeing here. And we know that there's been a lot of push from Beacon Hill to support education more in the state of Massachusetts. What this graph is really showing is those supports are heading to other communities, not necessarily to a community like ours or Chatham and Harwich, where I think the state is looking at in that Chapter 70 equation, us as having relative wealth, and you'd see that greater amounts of state aid would be pushed towards more towards like a Brockton, Lawrence, Lynn situation. So as I said, minimum required contribution. This is the minimum that the state requires each town to support education per student, multiplied by the numbers of students in the foundation enrollment. When we go through this process, this is based on a foundation enrollment. Foundation enrollment for purposes of each budget discussion is all of the students that a district is financially responsible for. So those would be all the students from Harwich or Chatham that attend Monomoy, but also all students from Harwich or Chatham that attend other schools that we're financially responsible for paying tuition to. So that would be, that would include students who choice out to Nauset or DY or Barnstable, or students that are choicing out to a charter school like Lighthouse Charter School or Sturgis, and also students that that are placed out of district in special education programs. This minimum required contribution has shifted towards towards Harwich this year, but you'll notice that there's been a gradual trend in recent years where the minimum required contribution for Harwich has gone up appreciably, where Chatham has been relatively flat. It's only in this last year that Chatham saw a slight uptick in that minimum required contribution. Again, not something the school district sets, but this is something that that's largely driven by the Chapter 70 formula and factors from the Department of Revenue. So foundation enrollment trends. Our school district, in the way we calculate our assessments to the two towns, one of the important numbers is what's the 3-year rolling average of foundation enrollment. Again, in this case, it's a slowly increasing foundation enrollment towards Harwich. Chatham's is slowly going down. So in this single fiscal year, we see a 0.9% shift from Chatham towards Harwich in the foundation enrollment. That 0.9 is actually a fairly large, it's one of the larger single year shifts that we've seen in my time here. So it seems like a relatively small amount, but all of those small increments add up over time. The next two graphs are looking at the minimum required contribution relative to foundation enrollment. So foundation, the foundation enrollment again is all the students that we are fiscally responsible for, the foundation and the minimum required contribution is the minimum amount that each town is initially responsible for our budget. So you'll notice up there that in the last 3 years for Chatham, there's been a rather significant drop-off in that foundation enrollment. And that's, again, just to emphasize, that's not students from Chatham fleeing our school district. That's just there are fewer students, school-age children in Chatham, period. So that's, so that number has been dropping off. Again, other factors behind the Chapter 70 equation, are causing in this current fiscal year that minimum required contribution to swing upwards for Chatham. That minimum required contribution also swings upwards for Harwich at a higher rate than it does for Chatham. So you'll notice here, foundation enrollment has actually been growing for Harwich in the prior 3 fiscal years, and it's only this year that we've seen a slight drop-off in foundation enrollment for Harwich. And this is one of those conversations I've had at both select boards that the fact, looking at foundation enrollment for Harwich, over the last 9 years, we see a relatively stable number of school-age children, and that's in many ways. I think Chatham would look at that as a good problem to have. Chatham's been struggling to maintain, young families in its town and maintain, school-age children. Harwich has been able to maintain school-age children at a better rate than most Cape towns, and I would partly argue, our school district is responsible for us helping the town of Harwich keep children here. Just guidelines that we use when we're having the initial budget conversations. We take into account our school's mission, our school district's mission statement. We take into account the school's strategic plan. We also have each year tried to ensure that our class sizes follow guidelines that will create supportive classrooms both at the elementary level and also the middle school and high school level. So our class sizes are built around, or our budget's built around class sizes at the elementary school, average across grade levels of being 18 students plus or minus 1 and 19 students plus or minus 2 at the high school level. And an extremely important thing for us is that we try to make sure that our budget sits well within the fiscal wherewithal of our two towns. So we have constant conversations across the budget season with the town managers and the finance directors in both of our communities. In terms of our budget assumptions, as I mentioned previously, this is a level staff, level service budget. We anticipate our enrollment's going to be roughly what it is this year. There's no changes in FTE, just some shift upwards on the placement from elementary school placement to a high school placement of some FTE resource. We have the governor's numbers have come in, so we know what the state aid is going to be, what the minimum required contribution is going to be. Perhaps the only substantial thing that's changed here in this presentation versus any of the prior conversations we've had regarding budget is that the Cape Cod Municipal Health Group has set its insurance rates. So they were set at the end of January. And for the second year in a row, there was a 0% increase in health insurance. So that helps our budget greatly and positions us to do some things that we thought we might not have been able to do within the confines of our budget prior to this. We've been at least warned that Cape Cod Municipal Health Group has never had 3 0% increases in a row, and we have to keep in mind that at some point, both towns need to be braced because both towns also use Cape Cod Municipal Health Group. So at some point, we're going to have a regular health insurance increase, if it's going to be 4%, 5%, 6%, or whatever. And coming off of a 0, there's going to be a significant increase there at some point, both from the school district side, but also on the town side for their benefit costs. This does have a modest shift in the 3-year rolling average, particularly when it pertains to the operations in debt of that 0.9% towards Harwich. And we have $100,000 set aside in this budget to fund OPEB. We also have set aside $50,000 in this draft budget to fund a stabilization account. We started funding the stabilization account 2 budget cycles ago, last year, in an effort to have the budget come in to fit the fiscal wherewithal of both of our towns. We opted to not fund that stabilization this past year, so this is restoring the $50,000 commitment towards funding stabilization. Factors behind school budgets. Now, one of the big ones, obviously, is enrollment. Our student enrollment in terms of the students who actually are sitting in our classrooms seats, 65% of them are from Harwich, 21% are from Chatham, and 14% come in through school choice from other communities, and those students bring with them tuition dollars into our district. Our enrollment trend for the district, we have seen for the last really 4 years a fairly stable enrollment, roughly around 1,900 students within the district. The anticipated class sizes, as I said, we try to maintain our class sizes at the elementary level at the roughly around 18, and at the middle school and high school at around 19. You'll notice that there are some grades at Chatham Elementary School where class sizes are less than that 18, and those are spots where we would advertise and put on our website that we have openings for school choice at the 3rd and 4th grade level, and families that would school choice into the district would help stabilize the class sizes or equalize the class sizes between Chatham and Harwich. And because they're open seats, it would bring in some tuition dollars without having us add additional staffing to support the needs of those students. One of the things that was a challenge last year with our budget was an increase in the number of students needing expensive out-of-district special education placements. This year, we anticipate that this may actually be a source of some fiscal relief in the FY 21 budget. This is a slide that we can be proud of as a district. The orange line is students that are choicing out of our district for other school districts, primarily for Nauset. And you'll see that in the last 3 years, we have had a tremendous reduction in the number of students that are leaving our district for other placements. Our charter school outnumber is down just a little bit in the recent years, but has overall, over time, held fairly flat. The other thing to note up there is the green line are families that are wanting to choice into the school district. And I think if it sort of understates how many families want to choice in here. These are just the number of families or number of students that we are opening our doors and letting in based on where we have free seats. Every year we have far more students that we tell their families, sorry, we don't have room. So all in all, good trend in that reduction of students leaving us, families still wanting to come here and take advantage of free seats that we do have available. In terms of ways that we can offset and support the budget, one of the places where we can do this is using funds that we have in our excess and deficiency account. We started our new regional school district back in FY12 with no reserves. And we intended over time to, I guess our long-range plan that Katie and I had when we first started was to get to a place that 7 years out that we would be at 4% of our budget. We would have a reserve that would be equivalent to 4% of our budget. And what we were able to report back last year is that within 6 years we'd actually reached 5%, and that positioned us to actually give more back out of the excess and deficiency account than typically was rolling into it in a fiscal year. In a budget our size, typically you would see around $300,000 rolling in as unexpended funds at the end of a fiscal year. We've been able for the last 2 years to use significantly more than that out of that account to help offset the budget. So we are using $550,000 out of our excess and deficiency funds to offset the FY21 budget. We also, in our initial budget conversations with the school committee, talked about using $120,000 of that excess and deficiency account to partly launch a much needed elementary English language arts curriculum. And we'll spend a little more time talking about that curriculum and the thoughts about launching that in a few minutes. We also offset our budget with school choice revenue. So these are those students that are choicing into our district. They are bringing in any given year roughly $1.3 million of tuition is coming into our district from the students that are choicing in from other towns. We are increasing our use on that of that account in the FY21 budget. So we used roughly $1.2 million to offset our budget last year. Because of the increase in the number of students that are actually choicing into the district, we can increase that number by about $100,000. So we'll be offsetting the FY21 budget to the tune of $1.3 million. Circuit breaker is reimbursements the school district gets for expensive out-of-district tuitions. The state has a commitment to pay a portion of each of those tuitions. We're using $290,000 of circuit breaker money to help offset this coming year's budget. That's slightly reduced from last year, but if you remember, we're also anticipating fewer students choicing out, so that the amount of circuit breaker money that we can anticipate coming in is less. So that's part of that balance. In terms of tuitions out, this is the other side of school choice. So we have school choice students that are heading out of our district. We see $1.2 million of tuitions heading out of our district. We see $1.3 million of school choice tuition coming in. So we're one of only school districts on Cape Cod where there's that difference is a net positive in our direction. We also see $1.2 million of charter school tuitions out. There's a big difference when one student heads out to school choice to another school district like Nauset or DY. They take with them $5,000. When someone choices out to a charter school, they take with them the per pupil costs. And we'll kind of jump at the end of the slide. I have what does that per pupil cost look like? But for us, those students are taking with them about $17,000 with them to Sturgis, so it's a lot more than the $5,000 for a single school choice student. And in terms of our strategic initiative, at least the big one that's impacting this budget, we have spoken about the need to improve our elementary ELA curriculum, and in fact, it's not just improve; it's to get both of our schools, both of our elementary schools. I would say it's not even. We need to have them be in the same book and on the same page in the same book. And at the moment, they are quite literally using different books, and it's hard to go and bring a regional curriculum together if we're in two completely different places. So there's been a need, and I think this is one of those sort of last pieces of fully regionalizing the district is to fully regionalize an elementary curriculum. We had been looking at using that excess and deficiency fund to use $120,000 as one-time money out of that excess and deficiency fund. We met with our finance subcommittee, so that's a subset of the school committee, to discuss the good news on having a 0% increase in health insurance. And the conversation at the table and the consensus at the table was we should use that good news, the available funds from a 0% in terms of health insurance, to be able to position us to fully launch a new elementary ELA curriculum rather than staggering it in and phasing it in over a set of years. So we, this is a slide that just talks about the process that we're going through for this ELA curriculum adoption. I don't at this moment have an absolute dollar sign to say this is how much the new ELA curriculum will cost, but over the course of our next two school committee meetings, we'll be there. So Mark Smith, our Director of Curriculum Instruction and Assessment, will do a short presentation tonight during our school committee meeting to talk about where they are in their process of adopting the new ELA curriculum. At our next school committee meeting on February 27th, he will bring us a report out from his subcommittee on, I think, 2 curricula that they're honing in on and what their recommendation is and why. And then I anticipate at our following school committee meeting on March 12th, there will be a proposal from that group on here's the program that best fits us, what the dollar sign is, so we'll know on March 12th what that solid number looks like. But we do have, between the money that we had initially talked about setting aside for our from our excess and deficiency and the savings from a 0% on health insurance, we should have the funds there to go and launch this in one effort as opposed to doing it piecemeal over several years. In terms of our draft budget, this is a $41.8 million budget. Ultimately, this slide is how the school committee will vote the budget should it ultimately be approved as it currently stands, but the school district or the school committee votes by cost center. We have a slide that just has how this budget looks at each of those cost centers since FY15, and so you can break it out that direction. Behind the budget, we also have a comprehensive, long-term capital plan to maintain our buildings, but also to maintain the computer technology within those buildings. So every year we have different projects that are going on in each one of the schools to keep the facilities supporting a high-quality education, but also to keep our internet system and the devices that are being used in the classrooms at a place where that they're supporting a high-quality education. So in the draft budget, there's $171,000 that is allocated for building maintenance. There's $183,000 allocated for the technology to support the educational program, and additional $50,000 to support the stabilization fund, that should something go wrong in the midst of a budget year, and this year, maybe it's not so much something go wrong, but sometimes things come up that are unplanned. This year we tapped into stabilization for the first time. Mid-year we had a playground that was in desperate need of getting replaced, and the one that needed to get replaced needed to be demolished, and we worked with the town to use our stabilization account to fund the costs that Harwich DPW had to go and remove the old playground and dispose of it. So we tapped into stabilization partly to take care of that. This would, continuing to fund stabilization would allow us, you can imagine at some point, a freezer, one of these big walk-in freezers that you have in an elementary school or, the middle school might go, and that, that there would be money that we could go to replace a freezer mid-year. In terms of how a budget's funded, the vast majority of the funds to support a budget come from the taxpayers in our two towns. So the assessments to our two towns pay for almost 84% of this budget. 63% of those monies come from the town of Harwich, and roughly 21% come from the town of Chatham. The next biggest piece of funding that comes in is this Chapter 70 state aid, and that represents almost 9% of the budget. The next biggest piece of funding to support the budget comes in as that school choice revenue, the tuition dollars that are coming in from all the families that send their children to our district. And then the other slivers up there, we have how we're using our excess and deficiency to help offset the budget. The school district gets some regional transportation aid. There's also some charter school reimbursement that comes in, and lastly, there's the use of circuit breaker. After the money comes in, how we expend it. Schools are a personnel-intensive thing to run. 71% of our costs are the costs of paying our employees and paying for their benefits. The next biggest chunk up there in terms of outgoing revenues are actually the tuitions, that $2.4 million in tuitions that we pay out for charter school and school choice heading out of our school district. This slide just looks at the comparative budgets by category, just looking at sort of a summary, how much of our budget is salary and wages, expenses, fixed charges, and programs with other school districts in the capital and debt. And this looks at how much the budget, what percentage of the budget is each of those, and how that has changed over time. As I had mentioned, this is a $41.8 million budget. This is a budget that has increased 2.64% over the prior fiscal year. And I want to emphasize that 2.64% budget increase is our lowest budget increase since I've been here. So this is, that's good news for our two towns and for our taxpayers. You'll note up there, one of those categories, the capital, that you see a 16% increase. That's because that's that additional $50,000 to fund stabilization. That's what drives that one sort of summary line up so much. And you'll note that the debt is going down. The debt will continue to go down each year over the next many years as we pay off the debt for the new high school. So just, oftentimes we get asked about, per pupil expenditures and what's Monomoy's per pupil expenditure and how does that stack up versus other school districts. The state publishes per pupil expenditures on its website. They're a couple fiscal years out of sync, but in FY18, our per pupil was calculated by the state as $17,503. You'll notice that our per pupil is significantly less than any of the towns that are part of the Nauset school system or the Nauset regional school system, which would be their middle school and high school. So, so we're, in the $3,000 to, $10,000+ less per pupil. And a lot of that has to do with just different approaches that we have here when it comes to school choice than how Nauset approaches school choice. Approximately 30% of the students at Nauset that are attending Nauset come in from other towns. So when you have that many school choice students coming in from outside, you have to add staffing. And the reality is, if you add staffing and don't approach school choice as a, do I have free seats? Like if we go back to the class size slide, if you have free seats at Chatham Elementary School and you can bring in $15,000 for three more, $5,000 a piece for three more students for each class and bring those class sizes up to 18, you don't have to add any staff and you get the benefit of some additional funds. But if you have to start adding staffing, to have a classroom's worth of students come in, there isn't enough money following them to go and fund the teacher, the teaching assistant, the benefits. It becomes a overall cost, and you have to end up subsidizing it. And that's in many ways, as when I came here to the school district, I think that was the lesson that the town of Chatham was learning on how much it was costing them to subsidize all the school choice students that Chatham used to have coming in there. All right, so the next set of slides are the slides when we go to speak to select boards or the finance committees. They just want to sort of jump to the end, just how much is it going to cost us, because just because we have a $41.8 million budget, it doesn't mean that this is going to cost our towns $41.8 million. So the budget is how much it's going to cost to fund the educational program. But there's a formula that we go through to calculate the assessment, and there are things that get backed off of the overall budget that lower it before you sort of divvy out how much each town is going to have to pay for their proportion. A big driver in this is what the state calculates the minimum required contribution as. And that minimum required contribution, as I mentioned, shifts in this disproportionately towards Harwich. So that you'll see that the assessment change for Harwich is quite different than the assessment change for Chatham, largely driven by a much more pronounced decrease in the number of students from Chatham that are in that foundation enrollment. So what we see is the increase in the minimum required contribution for Chatham. Chatham's minimum required contribution behind this FY21 budget and assessment, Chatham's goes up by $64,000. Harwich, on the other hand, goes up by $412,000. And it's that big difference in that minimum required contribution shift has a lot to do with how the next couple slides on how the assessment calculation plays out. So when we take that $41.8 million budget, we subtract off of that the different funds that we're going to use, be it the $120,000 for our, to partly launch the ELA curriculum. We deduct off of that the state aid that's coming in, the $550,000 that we use from excess and deficiency, the charter school reimbursements that come in, money that we get from the federal government to offset Medicaid, just interest and other revenues. And then we take, the remaining amount there is, what we have left of the operating budget that needs to get split between the two towns. But before you split that, you first go and deduct from that what the state says each town has to provide to support the education at a minimum. So you deduct Harwich's minimum required contribution and Chatham's off of that, and you come up with, okay, an amount of money that needs to be split between the two towns. So up there's $15.7 million that needs to get allocated for the operating budget between the two towns. That gets divided out between the two towns based on a 3-year rolling average of foundation enrollment, which is 74.35% Harwich, 25.65% Chatham. So it has the funds that Chatham will have to pay versus the funds that Harwich will have to pay of that. So ultimately, you have an operating assessment. The way the regional agreement goes, there's an operating assessment, there's a transportation assessment, and there's a debt assessment. The transportation is the only one that operates slightly differently in terms of its percentage between the two towns. Transportation, the way our regional agreement reads, is split based on the number of students from Chatham and the number of students from Harwich that are actually attending our schools. So not foundation enrollment, but actual enrollment. So we come up with a draft assessment taking into account the operating budget, the transportation budget, the capital budget, and debt for the two towns, so that the total draft assessment for Harwich is $27,340,929. The total draft assessment for Chatham, $9,076,801 for the draft assessments to each town. We compare those to the prior year's assessment, and what we see is that Harwich's assessment for FY21 will go up by $697,515, or a 2.62% assessment increase. Chatham, by virtue of fewer students behind that minimum required contribution, sees their draft assessment going down by $62,086, which is a 0.68% reduction. So overall, our assessment for the towns combined, it's a 1.78% assessment. So if you remember, it was a 2.64% budget increase. The assessment is less because we're using more money from our excess and deficiency. We're using more money from our school choice account. So we're able to drive the assessment below what the budget increase is. But unfortunately, this shift in minimum required contribution creates a difference between, we see in one town the assessment increasing, and the other town the assessment actually slightly decreasing. So that's the budget presentation from one end to the other. Tonight is the February 11th public hearing at our upcoming school committee meeting, 2 meetings away, March 12th, we'll actually have a budget vote. We won't vote on the budget tonight, but that's when we have our annual budget vote. We then submit the approved budget to the 2 towns the following day, and ultimately, we hope that we get support from the taxpayers and voters at Harwich Town Meeting May 4th and at Chatham Town Meeting May 11th. And I'll stop there and open it up for questions.
Thank you, Dr. Carpenter. Are there any questions from the committee at this time? Tina?
Yeah, I just wanted to get a clarification on the ELA curriculum, just so I can understand, because I know we made a different decision or proposing it. So it's slide number 25. So in one effort versus multi-year rollout. So that means that with one effort, every grade gets it at the same time. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay.
So when we were initially thinking, if we we were trying to come up with some at least earmark for starting a rollout of a new ELA curriculum. And so at the moment, this is sometimes the challenge of having your curriculum development a little out of sync of the budget process, but they, so we put a placeholder in there and thought worst case scenario, maybe it gets rolled out and you do kindergarten and first grade, and then the following year you can do second and third, and then fourth grade. So you can do it that way. Ideally, if we can have the funding, and I think the combination of the $120,000 that we had earmarked with the savings that we see with the 0% coming in health insurance positions us to buy that curriculum, and I think it also allows us then to support the implementation and the professional development, to have a successful implementation, that you're doing it all at once with your teachers, as opposed to bringing the same PD back, for 2 or 3 or 4 consecutive years. So it will provide for a more effective rollout.
Great. Thank you for clarifying that. And I guess if I could just ask one other question, because I've always been really curious about this. I guess this is slide 37. So when we're looking at the per pupil comparisons, and we've got Nauset, and I think that's the middle high school. So all of these other towns, this is based just on elementary?
Right.
Okay.
So it's how they do the budget on what they're saying the cost of running the elementary program in that town, and then the Nauset number is what would the cost be. So the regional, what that regional school district is assessing the town to run the middle school, high school program. So you can imagine that superintendent union that they're in there. You have you essentially are getting a bill to run Orleans Elementary School, and that would be running at $22,500 per student, and then the bill to run the middle school and high school comes out to $20,710 per student.
Right. Thank
which
you.
again,
Yeah, and thank
significantly
you for
more
that.
than our $17,503.
Exactly. And I think for me, that just shows the benefit of a regionalized system. So I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. James. Any other questions on the board? All right, seeing none, do I have a motion for adjournment? Are we taking public comment at this?
You're the chair, I'm not.
We can? We typically have it first, but absolutely we can do that tonight because we have time, so please. You want to come right up to the podium, just state your name? No, you.
Hi, my name's John Shoria with the Finance Committee in Harwich, and I just have a couple questions and for the school committee, Dr. Carpenter. And thank you, it was a great budget education. And when I mean, no pun intended, education, it is educational for me. It really is. I mean, it's a big budget. I'm relatively new to the committee in Harwich. I haven't spent a lot of budgets, but I'm digging more into bigger budgets, and yours has been one. And Katie's been very helpful. I've got in and spoke to her a couple times, helping me sift through everything. And I just have a couple quick questions, and you really don't have to answer them right now. I can come back and speak to Katie or something, but or if you have I have two quick questions, and I dig into my main question is, what is the total OPED debt for the school system? Do we know that offhand? I think
it's $45 million.
45 million, and okay, and then I didn't see a capital plan anywhere in here. Is that in the more sheets down there?
So we.
They're going to fight for who's going to answer that.
So we do have capital plans. So what you see in the presentation is sort of this year's funding of the building maintenance capital and also the building technology capital. But it's both our technology director and our maintenance director have plans that go out over the next 5 years.
Is that information? Where is that information? Is that in that
It's not in the budget packet, but we can go and send that to you, and I probably even post it on the website if it's not there already.
It probably is. Katie keeps referring me to the website. The reason I asked for that is, your playground, not to divulge too much, go into that, but that's a capital expenditure, and it was caught, some of the folks in town, Harwich, by blindly as not being on any type of plan. And I like to see long-term plans, 5 or 7 years, as a capital expenditure. So I didn't know what's coming up for capital expenditures. I don't know how old this roof is. I don't know how old the roof or the under buildings are, but those are major capital expenses that need to be prioritized and planned out over the years. The other bigger question, and it probably isn't a good time, I can go back with Katie, which I'm happy to do, is really understand this minimum contribution thing. I thought I understood it, but then you started giving me a lot of more information, and it put more questions into my mind. I think you showed one slide where Chatham minimum contribution, and I realize this is set by the state. Is that correct? And Chatham's minimum contribution is roughly 4.2 million. Harwich is the teeny numbers here, 13.2 million. And from my understanding, that's what the state tells Harwich or Chatham they must spend per student in their towns if we weren't a regional system, but they would go to Chatham and say, you must spend $4.2 million for a quality education for your students in town. Is that what that means? Now, I know we spend a lot more.
It does mean that, but what the phrase is, though, is for an adequate education.
Yeah.
So I think Katie's word there on adequate
Versus quality.
And I think Charlie, one of the things I've appreciated about Charlie over the years is his advocating for a quality educational system. And I think if you look at the school districts around the state that are high-quality school districts, they aren't spending what the state is referring to as adequate. And I think there are some towns that are spending half what we are and are getting half what we are. And I think that's something to kind of understand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Madam Chair?
Oh, I'm so sorry, Ms. Scott.
May I just, if I remember correctly, there was one of those educational videos about required minimum contribution that was, there one of those, Katie?
On the website.
Was there
On
a
the
video
website.
on, well, that can be emailed to you as well, but
No,
wasn't there one of
Katie's
those
very
educational videos?
good at telling me on the website.
Yeah.
So that might help explain it, because it's kind of a mystery in how they do all the calculations.
Mhm.
It's not exactly, cut and dry. They
Yeah.
kind of do their voodoo magic and say, this is how much you're required to pay.
So I didn't realize that was a separate line item in the budget, and then you proceed to do the 75-25 assessment on top of that. And I'll get with Katie a little bit more on that. And on the school choice thing, we have had a lot of children, students going out of the school district, but you say you have more coming into the school district. And where's that one piece of paper I had? It was 275 children were coming into the school system,
Is it
but only
page 10?
229 were going out of the school system. So does that mean that when we get this $5,000 from the children coming in, but the quality of education is costing us more? So we are spending more. We aren't really getting money coming in. If those students didn't come in, we would have 50 less students to educate.
So I think I wrote my doctoral dissertation on this phenomena, and I thought one of the best pieces of wisdom that a superintendent shared with me is, and we could take 3rd and 4th grade at Chatham Elementary School. There's 15 students that we anticipate being in those classes next year. And we have a choice. We can say, we're just going to keep those classes at 15, and the Harwich ones are about 18 for 3rd and 4th grade. So we keep Chatham at 15, and the 3 seats that are empty in there, we can let dust gather on those desks. Or we have the option to go and bring in $15,000 in 4 classrooms each, and see $60,000 come into the school district and do something good with that $60,000 without adding a single staff member. So it's the choice between leave the seats empty or bring them in. If we were to add at any given grade level, 30 students, and we're bringing in 2 staff plus a support staff person and paying out 2 benefits packages or 3 benefits packages, it becomes a loss, a net loss. It's no longer not that we're having revenue come in without additional cost borne by the taxpayers. So I think that's the approach that we've taken here at Monomoy, is to thoughtfully look at school choice as how can we go and fill empty seats, as opposed to how can we fill empty classrooms. And I think the school committee and all know that over the last several years I've been closing down classrooms in our buildings and turning away school choice applicants, rather than keep classrooms open and fill them at $5,000 a piece. When that classroom gets filled, it's not fiscally a wise move.
Thank you. That's what I kind of thought. I just see it as a black and white issue. We're bringing in 50-plus kids, extra kids, other than our district kids. And that's got to cost more than $5,000 per head, which it is costing more than $5,000. But I realize those 50 children are spread over 12 grades. So to your point of 3 being in this class, 4 being in this class, if they weren't in that class, they would be empty seats. You'd still have to have that same teacher there to teach the 15 versus 18. And I just wonder, at some point, does it bubble up to where you have to bring another staff in to handle school choice children? And I'm sure it sounds like you're pretty cognizant of that fact there. So, and I know that school choice is becoming an issue statewide too. Okay, that's about it. Now I'll visit Katie more, or Vanna, as you so dubbed me.
Well, the website.
Oh, the website, right. I'm old-fashioned. I like to talk to people. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else that would like to comment right now? And I do apologize because I look down at my agenda and I follow it very precisely, and I just bypass public comment. So if anyone else would like to speak at this time, be happy to have you. All right, seeing none, is there a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Roll call. Motion carries. Meeting adjourned at 7 o'clock, and we will immediately be going into our school committee meeting. 2-minute break. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's an interesting thing.
How are you?
gonna do much.
Good evening and welcome to the Monomoy Regional School Committee meeting Tuesday, February 11th at 7 o'clock. I'd like to call the meeting, our regular business meeting to order. First item on the agenda, calling to order at 7:05. First item on the agenda would be the approval of the minutes from the January 23rd, 2020 district meeting. Are there any questions, comments, or corrections?
I move to approve the minutes from the January 23rd meeting.
I would second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. The next item would be an opportunity for anyone to have a public comment. We do encourage that if you can limit that to 5 minutes, as we have a pretty hefty agenda tonight. But we invite you at this time to come up and comment on any subject or topic. Is there anyone that would like to speak at this time? Okay. Seeing none, we're going to move on to Dr. Carpenter and recognitions.
So just two quick ones. We started to post on School Spring for vacancies for next year, and one of the vacancies I shared with the school committee, but I had a conversation where Mark Wilson, our middle school principal, announced that he'll be retiring at the end of the year. So we have a posting up that went live yesterday for looking for a middle school principal, and Mark Smith, our Director of Curriculum Instruction Assessment, will be leading that hiring process. No, Mark's not leaving us. Mark Smith isn't leaving us, just Mark Wilson. So we'll have time to have Mark Wilson here and wish him well in retirement. We also have Janie Girolamo, who is one of our high school assistant principals and quite literally the longest-serving administrator with Monomoy, will be retiring at the end of this year. So we have a posting that went up on School Spring for Janie Girolamo's position. So just wanted to at least acknowledge those two retirements that we have upcoming.
Great, thank you, Dr. Carpenter. First item on the agenda tonight is the senior class trip to Philadelphia. There is a vote required tonight. It was presented the last meeting on the 23rd by the senior class. Are there any questions or comments at this time? And we need to approve that trip. Is there a motion to approve the trip, the senior class to Philadelphia? Or do we not have anyone here tonight representing the class?
I received a text. There is not someone coming tonight.
Okay. The only comment I would have regarding the trip was that we did discuss with them the volunteer work done by the class, and there was mention that the proceeds from individual fundraising efforts would go to the individuals who actually participated in the fundraising events, and there was a question of funding for other students who did not participate in the fundraising. That was kind of the main question we had. Otherwise, everything was laid out fairly clear.
I can just fill you in on at least some conversations I had with
Great.
at least one class officer. I think there are a couple fundraising efforts that are still to come, that all of the proceeds will be distributed amongst the entire group, and I believe that the leadership team is also in conversations at a meeting that they're having tomorrow morning to discuss how to further distribute and support the students' involvement or student participation in the trip.
Great. I think that as long as we continue to see our leaders lead and support the other classmates in the class, that's completely fine. Do I have a motion?
I would move that we accept the senior class at Monomoy Regional High School's trip to Philadelphia.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries.
Why don't we move on until,
Number 6. Item
so
6.
that Bill can get this live.
You want to go in order? What are you saying?
Oh, no, let's skip over the next one for a moment.
Okay, so FY '21 budget controversial, yeah. Conversation and approval.
So we don't need to necessarily, or we don't need to approve the budget tonight. The approval comes, of a budget comes in March, but we had, just prior to this meeting, our annual budget hearing, and I know that our audience has gotten much larger than during our budget hearing. I think the Cliff Notes would be, it's a level staff, level service budget. It is the lowest budget increase that we've had in the time that I've been here at Monomoy since we've fully regionalized. It's a 2.64% budget increase. There is a decline in the number of students that are attending public schools in Chatham relative to Harwich, and that has over the years created a differential where the costs of running the school district are gradually shifting more and more towards Harwich. The differential or that shift is actually more pronounced this year than it has been in some of the years. So there's a 0.9 shift in the 3-year rolling foundation enrollment towards Harwich that plays out in a rather pronounced shift in the assessment, so that we see that Harwich has a assessment that is an increase in their assessment, and Chatham going into next year's will see a net decrease in their assessment. So I think that would be sort of a quick overview in terms of how the only thing that substantively changed in the budget conversation that I presented at the hearing, and what conversations we've had at the table in past weeks. At the end of January, Cape Cod Municipal Health Group released their health insurance increase or health insurance rate increases for the next fiscal year. And there is a 0% increase in health insurance. So we were carrying as a placeholder in our budget a 6% increase. That didn't come to fruition, so there was cost avoidance. And we had talked about, when we met with our finance subcommittee, using the savings, so to speak, of a 0% increase to allow us to launch our elementary ELA, new ELA curriculum, instead of doing it piecemeal over a set of years, to be able to use that funding in addition to $120,000 out of excess and deficiency to implement a new ELA curriculum that's much needed in the district in one fell swoop, rather than over a set of years. And you'll actually be getting a presentation on that ELA curriculum launch from Mark Smith here in a few minutes. So that's the sort of the budget conversation in a nutshell.
Are there any other questions or comments for Dr. Carpenter regarding the budget? I realize we just had a presentation, but something may have sprung up. No? All right. And we are going to move forward. Actually, we're just waiting on the, oh, you're all set, Mr. Burkhead? All right, that's great. We can move forward with that. Monomoy Regional High School School Improvement Plan Update and Data Presentation. You're hiding in the library.
Thank you. Well, I interrupted enough trying to fix the computer. One day our tech guru isn't here. I had to figure it out myself, so. I did. I texted him and he gave me the answers. So. I'm a problem solver. So, welcome. Thank you for having me here tonight. It's been a while, and I'm pleased to be back when I think I've got some exciting news to share with you about the high school, to give you a mid-year update, and to also give you an update on our school improvement plan process and protocols before we bring it to you for the summer. So for the mid-year, and then at a subsequent meeting, I'll be sharing an in-depth look at our school data. So tonight, for the mid-year report, I thought I'd focus, where it is election season, on our social studies and civics programming at the high school. About 4 years ago, during the 2016 school year. I know that year because it was during the last presidential election. And the timing was interesting because we were, at that time, we were making some changes in our programming at the high school. And we were moving what we were finding was that we had too many restrictions on our students, too many requirements in our graduation programming, where kids weren't getting options that they needed to go on to colleges. So what we did is we moved the 4-year requirement for social studies and allowed for kids to have opportunities to go into technology or to the arts or other directions. But what we did do at the same time is we made sure that every single student would have civics in 8th grade. So we moved it earlier. We thought that was important. We thought that take it out of being an option, and we were ahead of the curve back then because now it's a state mandate, and we were one of the first schools to do that. So that happened, and it had the full support of our social studies teachers, which I think are some of the best in the state. In sitting with them, the idea was that we could offer programming that would be experiential in nature, meaning hands-on, real authentic civics. So you learn it in the classrooms, but then you go out and you practice it in the real world. And I'm proud to report back tonight, 4 years later, some of the things that are happening, and wonderful things that are happening in our school. So I think we're proud of, as a district, that we take risks. It was controversial at the time when we did that, but we had the full confidence. So the school committee had the full confidence, approved it, so thank you. But also the confidence of our teachers that I had the confidence in them that they were supporting this and that they know they could pull some things off. So the things you're going to see tonight in our social studies programming is a lot of hands-on stuff. It's open pretty much every student. First of all, every student will get the experience in 8th grade. But then after that, the clubs that we offer here, every single student can join. And there's time during the school day, during our Jocelyn hour to do that, and there's also after-school opportunities. So every student in the school can appreciate this. So let me just start. So first I wanted to share, now these are not next year's senators, although they could be in a few years. You know, this is another reason for dress codes maybe someday. Don't they look awesome? These are our students. And we had a little dry spell with our Model UN class. This is our Model UN club, Model United Nations. And I think there's been up to 30 kids at this at their meetings, and 20 went to this, what I'm going to talk about next, this program. So it's revived by one of our new instructional assistants, Miss Evans. And I won't read all this if you have, but I'll summarize a little bit. So our Model UN is kind of what it says. The kids go to their first conference. It was at MIT. They were excited about it. That was where the picture was taken. And they were part of a special political and decolonization committee, multiple committees you see up there, World Health Organization. So basically role-playing real-life situations that either occurred or may occur with different countries. And they're listed up there for you to see. And then an interesting part of this also is that the Monomoy students had the opportunity to meet and network, which is important, real-life stuff with other students, not only locally but internationally. So making connections in the high school, role-playing with real-life people from other countries, and the skills you see down below, critical thinking, problem-solving, negotiating, public speaking, teamwork, and diplomacy, most importantly. So real cool stuff. This was just this last weekend. They came back extremely excited. So I want to congratulate them. So that's a cool thing that will be continuing to happen. They meet regularly, and it's a really great opportunity. The next one is our mock trial team. Undefeated, 3-0, and you see that they've had some worthy opponents. And I was fortunate enough to attend the Nauset match held at Barnstable Court. And I've gone to them before, but they're extremely impressive. If you ever have a chance to go, it's like real life drama. They practice a real life case. Unfortunately, and ironically for me, it was a principal on defense on this one, so my collar was tightened a little bit. I don't know if they were, but it was fun, and our kids were the defense team in the first match against Nauset, and they played the roles from witnesses to jury. They have a real judge there. And it's a real case that happened, and they acted out, and they get points that way. So we've beaten the 3 opponents we've had. We're off to Worcester soon, March 1st, and so we look forward to that. So please follow them. And again, anybody can join that team. Got kids from all age groups. The The next you might have read about, again, this was, we had a recent group go to the Iowa caucuses. It was the only high school that was there. At least that's what everyone told me, our kids and our teachers. This was run by Mr. Dixon, who did this 4 years ago as well. When he first told me, I thought, I said, wow, what an unbelievable, I would like to go as an adult and just experience the energy and the passion and how a caucus is run. And so he decided to go again. But I want to back up a little and talk about the Political Action Club. What is that? I think 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, right after the 2016 election, a group of students came to me and said, we have a policy here that we want to encourage our students to start clubs. We want to hear what they want to do. So if they have an adult that's willing to oversee it, they'll come to me and they have to fill out a form, and then they have to kind of sell me on it, petition me, and we have a meeting, and I ask questions on it, and I always say yes. But it shows them there's a process to things, and they get organized. And so one of the ones we had was a Democratic club. So what do you think popped up a week later? The Republican club. So we had two clubs, and they were meeting, and they were, discussing elections and learning about politics, and they were very, it was just great. But these are the type of kids we have here. On their own, they decided that let's all meet, they were all friends, let's come together under one umbrella, and we'll call it Political Action Club. So this is students of, whether they believe in Democratic policies or Republican policies or unaffiliated, they're all together now. And it's really cool to see, and I think the adults, some of our adults, could learn things from this. I know I do. And they disagree, they have conversations, but it's really healthy. And so now, this club has been meeting, and I went into the preparation meeting for the caucuses, and they were asking some really great questions. And they had to make some tough decisions, like on a whim, if we're gonna go to this speaker, we're gonna have to leave early and travel 2 hours. So they had real life planning on to kind of organize their day and prepare. So they were able to see 6 Democratic and 2 Republican candidates during that process, which was really cool that I didn't know, I learned as well, is they were allowed into Davenport as observers of the actual caucus process. And we know it went a little awry there, so I was hoping our kids might have stayed and helped count. But, they saw it, but they really liked the process. In fact, they met with me afterwards, and that's the next bullet there, that they want to run one here at Monomoy Regional High School. And of course I said yes. We talked about organizational, we talked first about their goals, and I know Mrs. Gaines' daughter was one of them in my office. So just very excited, and they already had their ideas forth, what they wanted to accomplish. So it wasn't just to run a caucus. It was for the senior class, who they shared mostly, or at least a lot of them are 18, or will be turning 18. And earlier in the year, when we had our internship, one of our internship programs, we had kids register to vote. We already have done that here. So most of our kids that were 18 at the time were registered. We're going to do that again at this caucus, so we can get most of our kids that are 18 registered. But the whole process is to talk about the democratic process, to talk about what a caucus or a primary is, to educate our students that are going to be voters soon on that process, and then allow them to actually participate in an actual mock caucus. And the kids will run it. In fact, I think one of the advisors was there and asked, do you want so-and-so, a teacher, to moderate? And they said, nope, we want to do it. So soup to nuts, the kids will be doing that. I'll let you all know. I believe they timed it up March 2nd, the day before the primary, to kind of do it so the kids could go out and vote after that. So again, civics at its best, kids learning, going out, actually living it, and then coming back and teaching their peers.
They could report out their results with an app, too.
Yes, but
They know which
different
app
app.
not to use.
They use that green.
Okay, this next one is, I touched on this a little bit, is there our 8th grade programming here. Now, all students take the civics and again, in 8th grade. And there's something really cool called Project Citizen that is part of their curriculum. And ultimately, what we do here is we have all students participate in that. They come up with topics, real life, authentic topics. They research it. They go out and interview groups in the town, in the school. And so they all do that. And then we have an in-house kind of a competition. And we have teachers as guest judges and students guest judge that. And then the top finishers go into Boston to compete at the state level. And as you'll see a thread through all of this, not only are our kids participating in all these great things, we're competing at high levels. So in all the competitions, we're winning awards or placing on the mock trials team, being undefeated. In this case, we took home a bunch of awards. And I like the topics here, which are real life. So all 4 teams that we sent won last May. We'll do it again this May. So our E-Block silver team, they presented on shark safety, and they were advocating for the detection of buoys in trauma training. They won the Environmental Project Award. The blue team, presentation on banning plastic straws. And this is a nice aside, which successfully argued for articles of both Chatham and Howard town meetings. So our students had an active voice and a real-life voice in their own town meetings. They won the Best Hearing Award, and our Silver Block presentation on plastic ocean pollution won the Best Portfolio Award. And finally, the Blue E-Block presentation on Escape the Vape, pursuing flavored tobacco product sales before the Howard Chairman Board of Health, again, going to local boards and actually presenting in real life as students, won the Humanitarian Project Award for Best Overall Presentation. That was the big one. So I want to thank Mr. Matheson, Mr. Dixon, and those civics classes and students for doing that. So that's, again, something every year we'll be doing at high levels. Here's our advanced placement government class for our upperclassmen. Again, I'll just go over a few. So we had the opportunity, and Judge Rufo of Barnstable reached out to us for this. So we've got a reputation now of participating in a lot of these things. So we have people reaching out because they want our students. They know we're open to this stuff. They know our students are capable and reaching out to us. So he reached out to us and out to me, and I talked to Mr. Alexander, our government teacher, and he was, our kids were able to go and observe the Supreme Judicial Court in action in October. So they actually had live cases there. The kids went and saw. And just the energy when they come back talking about a real case, and you know, it's really contagious and uplifting, so that was really cool. And in the follow-up to that, Judge Rufo actually came in and spoke about a real case that's being appealed that he oversaw to our students. I was able to sit in on that class as well and learn a ton, and just was impressed with the questions our students asked the judge and just the learning experience that you have. It's just not something you see in textbooks, that a real judge comes in and talks about a real case, and had something to do with the bridge and Second Amendment, Fourth Amendment, I believe. And then we go to the Kennedy Center pretty regularly. We've got a good connection with the Cape Cod Young Professionals. We do a lot of things with them. They're a very powerful group in town, and they're very, and hopefully our kids will be able to join them at some point, so that's a nice transition. And then we have our own Sergeant Bill Massey come in and talk to the students about the Fourth Amendment. And current Rep Sarah Peak and Tim Willen also came in. So, and this is just this year so far. So Mr. Alexander is very active in getting our kids access to, and I want to thank our public officials for just being willing and able to come in. We just have to ask. And then our internship program, it's really a focal point of our school, and it started off in our first year with a couple kids, and then you know, Dave Alexander oversees it. He put a great teacher with a vision and a bunch of great kids and supports, and we're up to 60 students, and it's just seniors, so it's, you know, about half the class now. It's just exploding. And then this is just some examples related to civic. We have a lot more, but we've got, you know, Judge Rufo takes an intern, local attorneys take interns at both our PD. We've branched out to now Brewster is accepting, PD is accepting, and I know the both fire departments take kids as well. DPW, our local newspapers, the Cape Cod Times and the Chronicle. So what happens is we bring them in the first day, and we have a luncheon, and they meet their interns. The professionals meet their interns, talk about expectations. And we have a high bar to get in here. You have to be passing your class. You have to have good attendance because of the real life skills. You have to have your act together. And we do a good job of supporting the kids, giving them reminders, like you've got 2 or 3 absences, or you've been late 4 or 5 times. You're not going to earn an internship. And the kids always rise to that occasion. So that's something that's been really good to us. And then the next thing is the We the People, another club that's open to all students. Competitions where the kids prepare, and this was a speech competition. So it's regarding the Constitution and current events. And then they go to Boston and compete. And so our students this January wrote speeches responding to a certain set of questions and had to do with citizenship, government, and the Constitution. And the set of judges judges their responses, and in this case, and divided into groups focusing on different subjects. So this year we won an award for how the Bill of Rights applies in modern context to smartphones and social media. Very applicable. So our kids are not only researching this, they're preparing together, they're pushing and challenging each other, then putting it to writing, and then having to go articulate it with judges peppering them with questions and opponents. You know, it's interesting, when I was talking to Mr. Hoffman-Terry, who oversees this program, it was 4 years ago, I took my son to one of these competitions. He was a senior at the time, he was considering going to be a lawyer. He's got UMass Dartmouth now. And just today I was talking to Mr. Hoffman-Terry and said, I think you might have inspired my son. He's now at UMass Dartmouth, and he's got a 4.0 his junior year, captain of the football team, and he wants to go and be a lawyer. So I think that was one of the things when he saw that, he said, I wish my school had that. That's really cool. So that inspired my own son, so I wanted to share that with you, and that's pretty cool that our kids, all of our kids have a chance to do these things. And then just a couple of last things that didn't fit any big criteria, but a lot of, and there could be a lot more. The James Otis Lecture is a statewide opportunity for high school students that Mr. Houston gets our students involved in, takes those students to Faneuil Hall. They hear lectures from noted authors of legal background and history, and then they also take a tour of the State House, and they do portions of the Freedom Trail, and they're chosen by a group and honored on that day and learning about Boston history, so that's a nice thing. And then on Veterans Day, Mr. Houston really gets his students excited about this, and we teach this obviously, but then go out and attend local ceremonies. And I really like the local flavor of that. It's not go to Boston, it's not go to a state, it's go to local Harwich and Chatham ceremonies and see the experience. They do that. And you'll see in the next tour some collaboration among teachers of different departments. So Lisa Doyle is an English teacher here, and along with Mr. Houston, they write poems during Dr. King, about Dr. King, and then the students participated in an event in Orleans on Dr. Martin Luther King Day, and the top poems were recited there, and we had students obviously in that category. And then on the anniversary of 9/11, our history and performing arts departments get together, and we have song and announcements going through the morning announcements with all of our students to commemorate that day and make sure it's not forgotten. So that's a nice collaborative effort. And then other students go on virtual field trips 9/11. You know, as you get as old as me, we all I think at this table remember where we were at that time. A lot of our kids now weren't born, so we still teach that now and educate them on that. I think we're really proud of that. So again, that's a lot of our students doing that with our teachers. So that's kind of it in a nutshell of what's kind of going on. You see we're pretty active, and I think a lot of schools have one or two of these things, but not all. And I'll venture to go on a limb and say that, especially a school our size. So I think it's ambitious, but I do think it also that our teachers kept their word that they would give our students the best civic education in Cape Cod or maybe Massachusetts, but we're very proud of that. And it's open to all kids. Now switching gears a little bit, our school improvement plan. This is the process and product on a page. And basically, we want to develop a plan that implements some of the things we're already doing this year, but also focuses on next year specifically and then the next couple of years beyond. We've had working sessions with our instructional leaders, which are our department heads. They get involved. School council ultimately has the final say-off before it comes to school committee. So what we have is we've already had school council meetings where we've gone over this. They have last year's document, the strategic plan, and we've developed a subcommittee to meet. So we've got our instructional leaders meeting, looking over our goals and the strategic plan, and we've got our subcommittee of the school council also meeting to go over that, working in conjunction. So it's a collaborative effort. And then drafts are worked through both those groups. And through our instructional leaders during a professional learning day, when we get to one of our final drafts, we share that with all of our teachers. I think it's important that we get all of our teachers' input because it impacts them. So they get one of the close to final drafts. Any feedback is brought back to the department meeting, and then it goes to the school council subcommittee. So any final edits are that way. And then I send it over to Dr. Carpenter to look at, add his comments, And then the final draft goes to school council for this May 12th for a final vote, and then to the school committee for your approval. So I just want to make sure you understood that it's a very transparent and involved process that, and then the product, what's the product going to look like? And we started this 3 years ago, and we're proud of it. It's obviously directly connected to the strategic plan. I love our strategic plan. I think it was well-designed. It involved everyone, community groups, a lot of stakeholders, students, staff, parents, families, and it's a really solid document. So obviously, we're going to connect to that, which is important. The next one is NEASC, the New England Association of School Accreditation. We're going to use their language. If you remember, they come in this fall to evaluate our school and to accredit our school. We're waiting on that report now. But that's a research-based group, which most high schools and colleges use to prove their worth, and they rate you on 7 standards. So we thought it was prudent of us to use the language and the standards that were already researched that were being judged on by NEASC to align with our school improvement plan. So we're not duplicating efforts. So you'll see the language in there that is research-based and used by NEASC. And then the last one is just live links, so we can include something on the website. So things like, some of these things I shared tonight in civics, we could put in a live link with information so that it doesn't get too bogged down with too many words. People can go on, click on links to get more information, and it's more of a live document. And so I'll be bringing that to you and hopefully sometime this summer.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Burkhead, for the presentation. Any questions or comments? Ms. Stout?
Are there some drafts that, if we are individually interested, we could go look at that of where you're at in some of this process?
100%.
Okay.
Yeah. We're just starting out, so we just have our first draft, so it's actually just formed subcommittees and haven't started the draft yet, we just started the conversation, so, yeah. Anytime anyone is able to look at that, I'd be happy to share it too if you want it virtually.
And I'm really excited about all these awards and experiences that you're doing.
Thank you. Me too. And I almost forgot that when I went to the mock trial, that Mr. Bates coaches that, or is the advisor of that, but also Mr. Russell's son and his grandson performing there, the generational, it was just powerful. So I know your son gives a lot of volunteers, a lot of his Sundays and time to help coach that team. He's been doing so for many years, and that's a big reason why we're undefeated. So thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Any other comments or questions? Ms. Gaines?
I just love all of this. Thank you so much, because I remember, 2 or 3 years ago when the change with civics, do you remember that? This is like, I just want to hand this and say, look at what's happened with civics. So this is fabulous, and I want to thank you so much for all of this. I have one quick question. We the People, was that a class at one time, or has it? Okay,
Yes.
it was.
Yeah.
So it's now
It's
a
still
club.
yes. So
Okay.
the curriculum that was in the We the People was just kind of what we call the classes. It's still being taught, but this is now a separate club as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Any other questions or comments? Mrs. Scott?
Can you do this for all the departments?
Yes. I'll be here every week and get sick of me, believe me.
I mean, this is
The
just
only reason I'm here is because my
amazing.
wife don't want me home.
Yeah, just stay here tonight. But I just think it's amazing to have for the history and social studies departments. But I know that there's ELA or English, and there's foreign language and math and science clubs, and they're all over the place. So I just think that it would be great to somehow, I don't want to put more work on you.
No, it's already done, actually. I thought the same thing. Dr. Carpenter, we had shared some things with him to share with you as well. I know he has that, but it's all the work's, it's happening in every department, just so you know.
It is.
So I'd be happy to come back at any time and start chipping away department at a time.
We'll give you 5 minutes every meeting.
Perfect.
Go.
That's hard for me.
Dr. Carpenter?
So Bill will be back at our next meeting
Oh,
with
there you
sort of
go.
the data side, with the data side of this. We were having a chat yesterday about, and I wanted to, in some level, I just want to put to bed this notion that we don't do civics.
Exactly.
Because I think if anything, this high school is an exemplar on how to do civics. And, so I just asked Bill if he could go, just focus on that piece. And then I just was acknowledging that we have another, between the budget presentation and other things on our agenda, that I didn't want, us to get, sort of overwhelmed with now a pile of high school data. So Bill will go and kick off a 4-part series on data from each building at our next meeting.
Did you draw the short straw or the long straw?
You know the answer to that.
It's all about delegation.
Yes.
Department heads, they're gonna nail it.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments?
Just very quick.
Mrs. Henderson?
I just want to say thank you. This is a great opportunity, but one of the things that I think is most powerful is my daughter is an 8th grader, is part of the Political Action Club and went to Iowa, which is amazing. And she was so excited, and it was a once in a lifetime experience for her. But what I felt was the most powerful is that she was learning from the older kids. So she was watching Holly and Allie, and she was watching how they have learned through the years here in all of their Political Action Club, and if they were on mock trial and whatever their experiences were. But it's that home away from home where they were a group and it didn't matter what grade they were in, and those younger kids were really taking away things from those seniors. And just the story she tells is just wonderful. So I think that, those opportunities are just, wonderful for our kids, and I wish I had one. I was a kid.
So,
Yeah.
it's nice to hear that. Thank you for sharing.
Yes.
It makes me feel good.
Yes.
Ms. Gaines?
And if I want to add experiential learning. It is amazing what you do, not just in civics, but this is what I've seen at this high school, is the experiential learning. And to me, that's what really settles into our kids. So I echo what you just said.
Well, I do want to just credit the teachers. I mean, we get the best. You saw this, a lot of it's done on their own time, above and beyond, obviously, over a lot of it's on weekends, nights, so we got great people.
Bill, I want to thank you also, and just echo what the rest of the members said. I was a proud grandfather with 2 grandkids within the mock trial team. It happened to be coincidentally on the same late afternoon, evening of the DY basketball game. So I was delegated watching one of the grandsons, who's a senior here, all dressed up. And he's grown quite a bit, so his pants are 3 inches too short, and the jacket comes to here. And they walked away with a very impressive, there's so much poise, not just the grandkids, but the whole team. So he needed a ride to DY. So we were going to the game, so I dropped him off. He said, I'll keep the tie on, because away games, they dress up. And I just thought to myself, he obviously not a star in either activity, but so involved in it and so thrilled to sit and watch a kid with confidence grow in one setting down at the Superior Court, and at the same time jump out of a car and trot belatedly into the gym at DY to do some basketball shooting. So what a gift the kids have in this school with so many opportunities. Good job. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Russell. All right, great. Thank you, Mr. Burkhead.
Thank you.
Very much. Next item on our agenda is the 2021 school year calendar pre-Labor Day start. We have a vote required on this evening, and the start date survey. If you recall from our last meeting, we discussed the 2 options moving forward for the next school year regarding Labor Day. We typically start after Labor Day. I should say traditionally we start after Labor Day. But we were in a particular situation this year where Labor Day falls the absolute latest that it can. So we are faced with having to choose to start school before or after Labor Day, with implications on either side. We also discussed interest in having a survey done, which I believe Jordan put together for us, requesting feedback from our parents and families of our students. And it came back that start school Monday, August 31st, before Labor Day, was at 72.4%. And starting school Tuesday, September 8th, after Labor Day, only came back at 27.6% for this particular calendar year. It's also been presented to our teachers as it's a contractual issue, and they voted, I believe, 2-1 to start after Labor Day this year. Excuse me, before Labor Day this year. See, I wonder what I want. Let me correct that, 2-1 to start before Labor Day. So at this time, any questions or comments from the committee regarding the schedules? Any feedback about the survey? I welcome that. Sorry, Sharon.
Sorry, I can wait. This is a very difficult one for me. It has been, having grown up around here, it's been a long, long tradition to have it after Labor Day, and some of that, a great bit of it was because of the kids, the employers needing the kids to work, and, you know, I could go on. There's lots of all that. I do appreciate the survey. I do appreciate Tina putting out something, and I contributed a small bit to that. We did get a little bit of feedback, pushback from the director of the Chamber of Commerce in town, and some other people, but I do believe if we're voting for 1 year, we're not making this we're not trying to make a determination for every year. I think that if we're voting for 1 year, we do have some clear guidance that the teachers and parents are more for this, and if there's more serious problems, that could come out in another year. So I think it's a tough thing, but I'm, personally willing to vote for this year.
Thank you. And Gina, did you want to, was that a
I
hand or a
do,
finger?
but did you, yeah, I do.
No,
have a-
you can go.
Are you sure?
James. Yep.
Well, first of all, I just wanted to thank the union for getting together and giving us this feedback, because I like to have feedback. And
Yes.
thank you to the superintendent and to Joy for putting this survey out, because I think for me, it was really important to see this. I have just a couple of maybe comments or questions on behalf of the minority, because I heard several from families who I guess are in the 27.6, or 27.6. So a question I had, with some families whose businesses depend heavily on the summer tourism for their revenue, that's the 1 week that they go on vacation. And they had a concern about that. And I also heard from families that have already booked vacations. And then I heard from families that have their kids in summer school, or for summer school kids. So there was some concern. So I guess my question, I don't know what special consideration could be given to some of these families. I think they were really concerned and not wanting to start the year with 4 unexcused absences. So that is just my one big concern for some of the people that I heard in the minority, in the red.
One of them, I find one of them kind of ironic, but working on Main Street myself for many, many years, since I was 14, I absolutely understand the strength our Main Street in Chatham in particular has, and Harwich is growing as well. And I remember the push when all the college students would always leave, and it always left the locals there to work and to work the hours, and those stores are still working their full 9 to 10 o'clock at night hours straight through the holiday. And I certainly understand that. I am a little befuddled with maybe a family that it's Labor Day weekend and their busiest weekend, but they're going on vacation for their busiest weekend. So that one poses a little confusion in my mind, but I would think you would be at your business, but who knows? And I think some of the other things that I've heard would be childcare is one of the larger ones. I think we all find that at the end of the summer, those last 2 weeks, the rec programs and the camps and all of those programs slow down and or stop, and it poses a very large problem. And I think that's why traditionally a lot of families, this is just my feedback, but I think that's traditionally why a lot of families do go to vacation in the end of August, because there was no childcare. Looking at the other side of it, as a parent, I look and I say, June, I run into the same problem, because 2 weeks before school gets out, and 2 weeks before any of the programs start, which sometimes is until after July 4th, nothing started. And in the past, I think the rec has maybe thrown a camp in or something, but the community center's not starting the rec program, Monomoy is not starting their program. This year we do have the YMCA over in Harwich, but a lot of programs aren't starting for those 2 weeks either. So you're looking at 2 weeks of childcare issue on one end, or 2 weeks on the other end. if you really look at the calendar, you're looking at 3 days, Monday, Tuesday, no, excuse me, you're looking at Wednesday and Thursday, they'll be back at school, and then Friday they'll have off. So- Correct me if I'm wrong.
Monday, Tuesday.
Monday,
Oh,
Tuesday.
excuse me, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, so there's 4 days that they would be back in school, which potentially if they were a working student, I mean, I wouldn't encourage them to work those evening shifts, but I'm not sure how intense the first week of school, because as I don't have a high school student yet, and I have a middle school student, but, you know, I wouldn't want to question that, but that would be an option. I see both ways, having ups and downs and pros and cons. I think that unfortunately, when we approve the schedule and the calendar moving forward, maybe families have already planned, but I personally feel like if it's a decision made by the district, that it would be hard to give excused absences if the school calendar in fact reflects that school starting that week. That's just my 2 cents, or 50 cents, whatever you want to call it. Mr. Russell?
Very brief comment. It's so infrequent that you find 72% of any body saying thank you for the input, and the best that we could do is this, and I know nothing is ever 100% received by anybody. However, under the circumstances, I think the survey was a very valid experience for moms and dads to kind of get input. I don't think there's ever a solution, but there are many, many, many parents who have odd vacation times, and they fly off, and their children miss 3-5 days of school skiing, and we do the best we can. So I think this is the most logical thing, rather than back up our potential for non-school days because of snow or storms or power outages, and having parents call about June 30th, still going to school. So, and it is a 1-year experience, and we'll look into it, and I'd suggest those parents who have a major conflict, just to get in touch with the school principals, and they can work it out. So I think it was a good exercise, and without overburdening or worrying too much about it, a calendar has to be presented, and I think this is the best way to go.
I just wanted to clarify, because of what you said, Jackie, some of the families that reached out to me, believe it or not, their businesses are closed on Labor Day. So, hairstylists, for example. So if they're working all summer, and that's their whole summer revenue, and then they take that week off, but they close on Mondays, which they always close on Mondays. So anyway, it's just those families. I mean, you can't argue with the evidence in front of us. It's very clear. But I do feel, I just want to put on record what I have heard from those in the minority.
No, that's perfect. Good for them. Go for it. Any of Mr. Carpenter? Dr. Carpenter?
I did receive one email from a parent on this who informed me that they didn't like either choice. And I think it's the challenge on, I think for the families who, may have had something booked, we can work that out. It's, the reality is, and I think I brought this up at our last school committee meeting, we have families that, as it is now, are traveling out of sync with our calendar because it just is much cheaper to go to Disneyland, not on school vacation weeks. And it's something that particularly every elementary school, both of our elementary schools, are dealing with that real phenomena of families, looking at the, what it would cost to go on a vacation, and here's when we can afford to do it. And, we work with them on the attendance piece. Not ideal, but we can get over this hump. And second thing, I'll speak for myself and what I would recommend that we do. We start into negotiations again this coming school year. I think it would behoove us to come up with some language that provides some flexibility, and so we know that next year, instead of Labor Day being on the 7th, it's on the 6th. And then in a couple, and it may make sense, I'd argue that it probably makes sense to start before Labor Day next year. But in a couple years, Labor Day is going to be on the 1st, and I would argue that in those years, it would make sense to go after Labor Day. So I think there's a sweet spot that I think we can reach that can make most, and I think that's what both the faculty and the parents are telling us, that we can sort of make most people happy with some sort of sweet spot, that there are years, when Labor Day's earlier in September, it makes sense to go after, and when it's later, it makes sense to go before. But at the moment, the way our wording is in our contracts, we can't do anything but go after without creating, or without having to reach out and sort of say, okay, is it okay on both ends for the parents and our staff?
Ms. Scott?
I agree with pretty much what everybody has said. And ultimately, I think it's our job to look at educationally what is best for our kids. And I think everybody could say that on June 22nd, June 23rd, 24th, even up to June 30th, if it so happens that we have 5 snow days, that it's going to be miserable getting our kids out the door to school at the end of June. And I think that at the end of the summer, it's always a little bit easier to get them to go to school, even if it's the end of August 31st, because they've had the summer. So educationally, I think our kids will get more out of school starting on August 31st than they would going until June 30th. I also agree that we did survey the parents, and I can't remember who said it, I think Terry did, to have an overwhelming 3/4 or almost 3/4 of people agree on something is pretty amazing. Most surveys that we've ever done have been pretty darn close to 50-50. So I think that's pretty telling, and if somebody is very opposed, they're going to get all of their people to respond and show that they're opposed to it. I also agree that the people that have the prior vacations planned, and the businesses that have the student workers there. I have a high schooler that is student worker, and they want their employees there when the college kids leave. I actually remembered, and I had to verify for myself, but when my daughter started kindergarten at Chatham Elementary School 11 years ago, she actually did start before Labor Day. So before Monomoy was Monomoy, when it was just Chatham School District, they did start. I had to pull the picture up, and then I actually had to research and think, all right, well, if my digital camera wasn't accurate on the date, so I had looked up in the Chronicle, and then I got lost in Chronicle archives. But regardless, point being that Chatham Elementary School did start before Labor Day. I'd have to count back years, but she's in 10th grade now and was when she was in kindergarten. Harwich did not start before Labor Day that year. I did notice that. They started, I want to say, the Thursday after Labor Day. And then it was a late start. It was a late Labor Day that year as well. I can't remember if it was the 7th or it must have been the 7th that Labor Day was that year. So there is something there. And I also think it's very telling that our teachers who cherish their summers, they get through the end of June just to get to their summers, are willing to start earlier because they know. And I think they're also very well aware of what it takes to get a child through the school day on June 25th, June 26th. I think if you ask any teacher, they're going to say that educationally they're better off on August 31st than they would be on June 26th. So I think that, like Terry said, we need to make a decision, and unfortunately people are going to not be happy with it, but I think that pretty much happens with any decision we make. So those are my 5,000 cents.
Mrs. Sheen?
I think I can explain the 72.4%. This is the last bastion that still hangs on to starting school after Labor Day. For years I started, it just kept creeping though, I'll just say that. But it was always the beginning to the middle of August, teachers went in, and then kids came in before Labor Day. And I have to say here, the streets are pretty much empty. in Labor Day. It's not like Labor Day when I was a kid in Chatham, when it was still parades and fun. There's nobody here. So I think that might be the 72% that have recognized that. You travel through Massachusetts, through Connecticut, they're in school. So,
Ms. Stout?
So I have to agree with Nancy and also Joanne about the, many of us have been teachers, that it is, the kids are more, and the teachers excited at the beginning of the year. So that makes a lot of sense to me. I would ask, though, that we keep a log when we hear about problems people are having, because there may be ways to help them. For instance, one person said their divorce agreement is written up specifically, and a lot of them are, to have different things happen. And if the school year changes, it costs them, $1,000 or something to rewrite this divorce decree if it's contentious at all. And there may be ways that some other people have it written so that they don't have to be having that difficulty. And then as far as the childcare that you were talking about, with the two different youth, Chatham and Harwich youth programs that are in the summer, maybe I would be willing to talk to Eric Beebe in Harwich if there's any flexibility. I don't know if they're locked into all that now if we do vote this. So, they could be thinking a little bit differently possibly if the school kids' schedule changes. Just ideas.
Great, thank you, Mrs. Stout. I think, as I'll echo Mr. Russell, this is just this year. This is definitely a hot topic and definitely something we're gonna have to revisit at another point. But I'm sure we can find 6 ways to Sunday on why we do and don't support it. But at this time, I think we need to, I'm gonna ask for a motion so that we can move forward. Mrs. Scott?
I move to approve the 2020-2021 school calendar that has a school start date before Labor Day.
I would second that.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. And I'd just like to remind the audience that we had an opportunity for public comment at the beginning, and we will have another opportunity for public comment at the end as well. Moving on, the Student Opportunity Act, Dr. Carpenter?
So just a quick one. The state, in part of their want to provide more funding to schools, has one of their legislative efforts was a Student Opportunity Act that has allocated money to school districts. And Mark and I were on a webinar about money that we should be seeing, and it was an interesting conversation because we were told in the webinar that to access the money that we have to provide a proposal, and I'll kind of give a little more details on the proposal. The interesting caveat is that at no point during the conversation was there any mention as to how much money you have to plan for what your proposal is. So at least as of going into this meeting, the funding that we were supposed to receive notice of yesterday, I think, is still not determined. So so we do have to come up with a proposal. My 2 cents on this would be that I feel on some level, and I appreciate how it's being done, but I almost think it's the want to teach some school districts how to model what strategic planning looks like. And the nice thing is the want from the state actually dovetails into exactly parts of our strategic plan. When we look at wanting to focus on students that, that are in, traditionally underrepresented groups who are struggling in schools historically, and how we can support those. Well, that's part of our strategic plan, and that's really what this effort is for. So the school district has, between now and April 1st, we have to submit the plan on how we will use the money. And of course, I was tongue-in-cheek saying to Mark, well, we know that, Lynn Public will be getting $24 million. If I knew I was getting $24 million, that sort of changes what that plan might look like then if what we're going to be seeing is $20,000. I suspect that we're going to be looking at a much smaller number. So in the upcoming days, once we get that number, we will strategize on our end how to best target that money to address some of the things we want to achieve within our strategic plan. We'll bring that presentation to you, get approval from this body before presenting it or before submitting it to the state by April 1st. But they have a list of 17 recommended approaches, different programs that you might consider putting in place. They're all great. I mean, one of them on the list was universal preschool. Well, something tells me if all we're seeing is $20,000 that we're not implementing universal preschool for both Chatham and Harwich. And as I mentioned during our budget presentation, a lot of these new funds that are coming towards schools typically aren't coming towards communities like Chatham and Harwich that the state looks at as having relative wealth, even though it's not income wealth that our communities have, but the state looks at it that we're property wealth rich, relative to other communities in Massachusetts. So more to come when we know exactly how much that is and how big we can dream.
Great, thank you, Dr. Carpenter. Our next item on the agenda, as you all may be aware, there has been a request for a special town meeting regarding the Chatham Council on Aging property. And if you've been following the news, there have been multiple sites over the last few years presented. And there will be a special town meeting on Saturday, March 7th to discuss a feasibility study to locate the new Council on Aging building proposal for a piece of property that's located on Stepping Stones Road in Chatham. I think you all are aware of that location. It's by the basketball court and the parking lot on the backside where our athletic fields are. I believe it's not currently considered to be the middle school property. It's owned by the town of Chatham. And it actually is the land between the bike trail and Stepping Stones Road. The town of Chatham has been moving forward with developing a site for the Council on Aging, I believe on Route 28 in Chatham, across from the Shop Ahoy Larry's PX Plaza, and now this new piece of property has been brought to the town's attention as well, and that's what will be discussed at the special town meeting on March 7th. There's not really any known or unknown impacts regarding the property at this time, but I just wanted to take the opportunity, and the town of Chatham wanted the school committee to have the opportunity to discuss any questions, concerns, or have any comments regarding this property, impact it may or may not have on the property that we currently do lease from the town. The full site plan, I believe, is about 10,000 square feet and about 60 parking spaces, but I believe about 20 additional parking spaces, which would be part of the COA. I know it's an unleveled piece of ground, so I know a lot of that is still to be discussed. And again, it's kind of an interesting situation for the school committee to be in, but it does impact us as far as the property, the use of the property that we use it for currently, and any future use of it. And unless there's anything else to note here. At this time, I don't know that there's a full plan for a possible expansion in the future of the building. I would say that may be something for us to think about. And other than that, I just really want to hear what you guys had to say, or any comments, like I said, or questions regarding this piece of land.
Is everyone clear on just where on, so we included a little Google Earth map. So this is, for those of you who don't know, this is a parcel of land that's near and dear to me because up until about a year ago, I owned the house right across the street from it, but no longer own that house or live there, but I own the house that the bike trail across the road in my driveway, and so it's the teardrop sort of shape between stepping stones and the bike trail. So if you think of it, it's bordered by there's a sidewalk that goes along Stepping Stones Road on that side of the road, and then the backside of the request is bordered by the paved bike trail. So it's about roughly an acre and a half. It's about 600 feet long, going down stepping stones. There's an appreciable slope. One of the things I always enjoyed in living at that house is I could hop on my bike, I could push it across stepping stones, and I could coast all the way to Chatham, to the Chatham Bakery, and never had to pedal once. It was a little
Way back must have been a
treacherous. It was a
doozy.
little treacherous, just zipping across stepping stones at the bottom of the hill there, where the bike trail crosses. But there's a slope there, and then it continues to slope as you go past the cemetery and down past.
So many
past
visuals
DPW.
for that. Dr. Carpenter, do you know, and this may be throwing you under the bus, but maybe somebody knows the square footage of the current middle school property? I mean, we're looking at a 10,000 square foot build possibly for the COA. Do we know how big the middle school is?
I don't. However, I did dispatch our crack head of our director of facilities, Rick Travers, today in a yellow rain slicker, just to kind of give you some dimensions here. So so the dimensions, in addition to being roughly 600 feet long, the depth at its deepest point is a little bit over 150 feet wide. To go further add insult to injury with poor Mr. Travers today, I did dispatch him up to the Council for the Aging to measure the current building, just to kind of get a feel for what you'd be looking at on so the current Council for the Aging building, or Council on the Aging building, is roughly 56 feet by 91 feet, and it's a two-story building, and I think the proposal is for a one-story building, so you'd have a footprint, that would be roughly, 90-ish by 90 is, gets you to that roughly 10,000 square foot. So there is the petitioners have a site plan that was part of the petition that I've put into your packet, so you can see where the building would be located in that area, and where the parking area for the 60 cars could be located.
The current parking area we have where the basketball courts are, would that still be maintained, or would we be losing that?
So, the answer is it would still be maintained. At least the proposal by the petitioners doesn't involve those spaces, and I think the great unknowns are how does the part of the talking points in from the petition is that our lot where you see some cars added in front of the tennis courts and basketball and pickleball courts has a number of cars parked in it whenever the Google Earth picture was taken, and that that lot is frequently used so when we're having, so I mean, if you look in the moment in time when Google Earth picture was taken, there were sports going on our fields. That lot was filled up, and there would be cars parked all behind our building. So, so we use that, for our educational program in the spring time when tennis players and pickleball players are out there. They're using the lot pretty extensively, and the lot's actually used quite a lot at daily pickup. So families have learned, if you want to avoid being in the monstrous traffic jam that happens behind the middle school building, that only moves as fast as the slowest child coming out of the middle school because it's single lane, the families who might want to get out quicker have their children come run over and meet them at that parking lot, and that's where they're reunited at the end of the school day. So it does provide us a relief valve so that we don't have traffic heading out onto Kroll Road each day at pickup, because we do have so many families that do come. So, so we do use it then. That lot's also used during, during bigger school functions where we have, a need, for additional parking beyond what's in our lot at the middle school.
Okay. So we've got 3 soccer fields at the top that are used for soccer in the fall. Both middle schools, A's and B's, practices and games, and that lot's used for that. And then also, because of the jam over here, we have people that park on the hill and sideways on the road, plus our other lot's full. Plus we have the backup from the pickup, so the overflow goes over to this parking lot as well. But we're not sure if that's actually gonna be impacted at this time because it's undetermined, but we already have clearly a parking issue.
The fields are also used in the spring.
In the spring, right.
We have boys and girls lacrosse
Yep.
now at the middle school, plus baseball and softball.
Right, and then in the summer for the rec programs and all the other activities that happen at the school. I think it's just really hard to tell right now without knowing what it looks like, except that, I mean, the space that we do have right now is overutilized, would be my impression of it. And any other comments or questions at this time you guys have? Joe, you've always got something. Just-
I've been listening a lot to this, and I have an opinion. I think it's just premature of me to speak up. Having said I'll not put my foot into it, I'm going to a little bit, because I can't resist your suggestion. I've been more impressed by the arguments that I've heard from members of the Board of Selectmen. And their thinking on this seems to me the most substantive and helpful in going forward. So at this point, that's my thing. If I were to vote right now, that's the direction I'd take.
Thank you. Any other comments? The only other reminder I would put out that Leah just brought to my attention is that, just so I'm putting everything out and letting people know that that's also our evacuation route for run, fight, hide. It's also our fire evacuation route, which we actually have had to use a couple times. So we would just have to figure out how that works, but I believe that is what the Chatham Fire Station determined was the safest, quickest, and best route for our students to go. And then at this time, I think I don't have anything else. Mrs. Scott?
I don't know how to put my thoughts into words, so I'm gonna probably ramble.
I've been doing it all night. Go for it.
I ramble well. I have concerns, mainly because it's just a nice buffer to our property, and it's a nice option for us to have on our property. I actually recently moved, and I walk that trail a lot now because that's part of my walking loop. And I don't know. I don't know how to put it into words that it just closer to a school, and I can see those being a benefit. And I also am concerned about going forward, having that land, the parking lot, the parking situation, just adding additional cars into the mix in that area. If you've ever been around drop-off time, pickup time between, I mean, I've gone 7:30 in the morning to drop off middle school for clubs, and you have elementary school driving, and then 8:45 for middle school drop-off, and then pickup, and I have a lot of concerns with that specific area, and I can see where it might be helpful for the school to have that for expansion, for possible, I don't know. Like I said, I don't really know, it's not sitting right with me, is I guess the bottom line.
I think I hear what you're saying, and I think also as a Chatham taxpayer, it's, I have to sit here as a school committee member.
Right.
And think about the impact on the school and the district, and then I have to sit here as a Chatham taxpayer. So I put my school hat on and I go, oh my gosh, the kids that are crossing the road and pulling out onto Stepping Stones Road is no easy task, and Queen Anne Road to Stepping Stones is no easy task, and the bike path and the way people come speeding down Stepping Stones Road, and I think about the kids.
And they go downhill
And
really quickly
and they're
across the
coasting
street.
downhill to the bakery, and they don't stop, and they don't get off their bikes, and, accidents happen. It's just, this road itself is a nightmare to me. And then to have our kids that utilize those, I mean, in the morning, I don't know if anyone goes up and down Stepping Stones, but the kids are on their bikes and they're walking to school, and it's amazing that we still have a community that the kids can do that. And this is the way they go. They don't go all the way down Stepping Stones and then take a left on the Crow Road. They go through the back. It gets a lot of traffic, and I think looking at our school here, yes, it is a nice buffer, and it's part of our rail trail, and that's definitely something that I'll have to divide out. But right now, it's more of a safety concern for me. I think they have a perfectly good spot going on 28, but that's another discussion for another day. I just think that for me, for school committee, it's a safety concern. It's unnecessary. That's where I would stand on it. Mr. Russell.
Just what Chatham folks who want to hear a Howard voter.
Absolutely.
However, I'm here till 10 at night, and I got a whole vote, too.
Yeah, you do.
We might cut you down on this.
My first impression, it's kind of newish to me. I read the Chronicle, so I got a split little thing. I spent 4 wonderful years growing up, living in Chatham, right out of college, until I couldn't afford to live there. So I'm a Howardite. Is it a Howardite?
You're a Harwichian.
I think it's a Chatham decision. And I listened carefully to the Chatham 4 representatives here who walked it, went to school there maybe, at the high school. So there's far more input. Also, and this is my opinion, if never asked, I wouldn't be offering the land. I think it is intact. If Chatham decides that they have no other critical or valued land that is equal or better than that's Chatham's vote. And I too echo what Joe said, that the vast majority of times I rest my case on usually members of the school committee who spent some hours, in this case, the Board of Selectmen in Howard, or the Board of Selectmen in Chatham, who must have spent far more hours than I have looking into this. So my opinion would be that's the lease land that we get from Chatham for $1. And if there's another place that's ideal, similar would be if Cranberry Valley was asking us for a second or third hole contiguous with our property here, I probably would be in objection to that. So I'm a no vote here. So, however, if the committee was asked, as far as a surplus land, that was the original agreement to have this given to us for the use of the kids.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Russell. Mrs. Sheehan.
I'm with the other Chatham people, which is it's not resting well with me for other reasons. One is that intersection is very difficult, stepping stones onto where you go to the donut shop. What's that street?
Pearl Road?
Kroll, yes, I do live there. That you can't even see coming out, and to have kids on that sidewalk crossing as they do, because that's how they get to school, that's uncomfortable. But then my other piece is, it's a neighborhood. It's full of houses, kids' houses. And I don't know if you want to take that away from kids, that freedom of houses and being able to go over to the path, the bike path. It's a safety issue for me, clearly. I didn't know about it being the evacuation side, so that clearly, for me, is a very, my background says, you use it sometimes, and evacuation areas are almost sacred in my world.
Mrs. Gaines?
I am a Harwich voter. However, I am familiar with this area because my kids went to the middle school. And so for 4 years, I do remember going down stepping stones, and particularly with my concern is a safety one because of these 2 spots of where the bike trail crosses. And I do remember if you're running late, I mean, there was you really have to stop, and people, particularly in the summer, we were just having the calendar discussion, and as the traffic begins to increase there in June, I am very concerned about this, and I do remember with this parking lot over by the tennis courts, there were a lot of people, because we have kids with special needs, that it creates a lot of anxiety in that drive pickup. And I remember a lot of parents would pick their kids up there. And so that would be my concern is the safety. And I think about our special needs kids, because I know that was a special little parking lot there for some of our families. So I don't know what their plan would be after that. So that would be my 2 cents.
Great, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for your input, and I believe that was what was asked of us, and we have time to think about it and ask more questions, but at this time, we will move forward, and we have the task force update by Mark Smith. I don't see any funny pictures in this, like there normally are in the CIA.
It's pretty boring, it's all words.
What?
I knew it was gonna be last, and I was told.
Every minute matters. That's right.
They can't get distracted.
Well, that'll make it brief, won't it?
Brief it is.
I guess on my computer, just on the line, so.
Where is Jim when you need him?
Maybe.
Jim is,
Should text Bill. Bill got it.
poor Jim.
No.
I know, I should text Bill to text Jim.
Yeah.
To give him an answer.
Well, Bill could tell you how he did it.
Or go to the
Oh, he
webpage.
texted Jim.
Well, yeah, but Jim had to tell him what to do.
All right, people.
I mean, I can just go without it. You all have a copy of it.
We do.
It sounds like it's
And
warming
since
up.
there's no fun imagery tonight,
No, it's just me talking. All right, so Mark Smith, Director, Curriculum, Instruction, and Assessment. As Dr. Carpenter mentioned, just here to give you a quick update on where we are with the task force. So if you can flip along with the slides. So I'm going to take you back to where we started. So the group got together in the spring of 2019, so the end of last school year, and put out a call to teachers in pre-K through grade 5 to form a committee to start to look at, I think when I met with the school committee, or in the past, I know I've talked to you about I went through a sort of a learning journey process to just try to discover everything that was going on inside the district, and one of the things that I found was some lack of consistency in certain areas, one of them being curriculum. Yep, there we go, and it's working. We've done some work in a bunch of different areas, and as a K-12, and one of the areas that I wanted to draw some attention to was elementary school up through into the initial years of the middle school, English language arts curriculum. We put the team together in the spring, sort of outlined a couple of initial steps, did some team building, some knowledge building, and then through the rest of the spring and into the summer, we essentially took an assessment of where we were currently or are currently. We cataloged everything that was being used. We built some shared knowledge around the value of high quality instructional materials. There's a lot of research that's been done in this area recently at the state and national level, so we were sort of dug in there. The sort of idea was to build a shared knowledge base. And then from there, some of the main discoveries that we found was that the majority of the reading and writing instruction that we were using in K-5 was coming from teacher-sourced or teacher-created materials. And what we had learned in our research is the challenge with teacher-sourced materials is twofold. One is that teachers are spending their time and energy trying to find and curate materials. It's like if there was one statistic that if a teacher doesn't have a resource material that meets his or her standard, that this is a good resource to meet a particular standard, 96% of teachers will Google it. So then what ends up happening is you go from Google usually to Pinterest, and then from Pinterest to Teachers Pay Teachers, which has some really great looking stuff. The challenge with it is none of it is vetted. None of it is vetted to say, yes, this is actually a quality way to meet a particular standard. And the teacher spends all of her energy trying to find materials, and we all only have so much sort of cognitive capital. And once we've expended all of it just trying to find the materials, when we start to get into more higher level planning, like trying to figure out how to differentiate, how to meet specific needs for English language learners, et cetera, we've already spent all of our time just trying to find the materials versus teachers starting with a set of quality materials and instructional approaches to begin with, and then being able to apply that and differentiate that for the students in front of them. So we discovered, and just Harwich, the sort of the base program goes back to well before I was previously in the district, so it's like at least 20 years old, I think. And was an old product in Chatham. Well, it wasn't as old, but it was two different sort of main basal reading programs in the two different elementary schools that were, in theory, the two foundations. So this is the task force that has been working with me since the very beginning, and you'll notice some people with asterisks next to their names. So they've served on a subcommittee, which right at the end of the summer, I received as part of one of the regular communications I get from the Department of Ed about a project they were looking to run. The department's made a shift sort of philosophically in a couple of key areas where they've really tried to be more supportive and sort of leverage their breadth as a statewide institution to try to support school districts. So one of those projects is this project where they partnered with Ed Reports. Ed Reports is a national nonprofit that evaluates curriculum materials for alignment to the standards, for the quality of the text. They do it for math, they do it for English language arts, and they do some in the sciences as well. And they have a whole process they go through. There's a link there. There's a short video that I was going to show you, but in the essence of time, I'm going to skip the video. Which, if you're interested, I can send it along, but it gives you a sort of a encapsulation of their process. But anyways, they dive very deep. So they had partnered with DESE to help. Their goal was not to, and the department will never, I would be surprised if they ever take this stance. They're not going to suggest a particular resource to districts. what they wanted to do was coach districts on how to have a robust process for selecting. Because a lot of the research says that products get into districts not necessarily because of the quality of the product, but by all sorts of other means. Like, so you have this product, let's say for math, so you already have a relationship with the sales rep, so the sales rep gets you to buy their ELA product. Or, you know, you hear the neighboring district is using that product, so you go with that product. Or you go to, you know, some national conference and a, you know, great salesperson gets you and you fall in love with that salesperson and therefore buy that product. Where Ed Reports really comes at it from is it aligned to the standards? Is the text quality high, and is it usable? Like, does it have a high usability rating for teachers? And like each one of those larger categories is broken down into like ridiculous number of individual indicators. Like, it's very, very robust. So their team helped us walk through, okay, because even there you can get products that meet expectations for them. So then how do you find the one that's the best fit for you? So they worked our sub-team, which were those people with the asterisks, through a process. Last fall, through this winter, we had our last meeting with them just a couple of weeks ago to help us identify priorities for Monomoy, to help us winnow our list. So we used their overall rate rankings to get a list of 6 or 8 products that met expectations. So my stance was, if it doesn't meet expectations for alignment to the standards and for text quality, we're not even going to look at it. But that still left us a fair number of products to look at. So then we went through with this team to ultimately get down to 2 products that we've had come and present. And there was sort of a yo-yo, I guess, between the smaller group did a bunch of intense work and then reported back to the larger group, and we collected some information from that larger group, and then we went back and did some work in the smaller group. And then we had presentations of the 2 products that we're currently down to. There's a product called ARC Core by American Reading Company, and MyView, which is a Pearson product, which Pearson owns education. So anyway, those are the two products that we are down. ARC is a smaller company. There actually are no districts currently in Massachusetts that are using ARC Core. Then there are in Connecticut and Rhode Island. But if we were to go that way, we would be the first district, although from what I understand, at least part of Boston Public Schools is looking at ARC Core. So as I mentioned, we worked to develop a set of priorities because you get multiple products that meet expectations. They're aligned with the standards, they're text quality, and they're easy to implement. But then how do you figure out what's right for Monomoy? So that larger team, we worked to develop 3 major priorities around what we wanted to see from the materials, which you can see listed there, along with an implementation priority, which essentially was, once we selected something, what did we want the product to be able to provide in order to make sure we could implement it properly, which is really, from the teachers, it really was ensuring that there was high quality professional development to support implementation. And so we had a meeting, yesterday, where we then took these priorities and we made a very detailed rubric, probably had roughly another 50 indicators under each of these rubrics where people went back into the materials one more time and rated the presence of the specific indicators under each of these priorities. And they got most of that work done. They do have a little bit of homework to try to get it all done before we break for the vacation. And over the vacation, I'll organize that data. And then we have a meeting scheduled for the 25th where we're ultimately going to come to a consensus decision. And so we'll work with that group. The goal is actually to come out of that meeting with a consensus decision on which direction we're going to go to be able to then come and present it to you all on the 26th.
Great, thank you very much.
27th.
Yeah.
Sorry.
27th, yeah.
That's
It's a
true.
leap year.
All right, yeah, right, that must be it. It must have been the leap year.
That
Probably
must
wasn't the
have
fact that
been
I
it.
looked at the calendar wrong.
Wow, it's all this hard work, we're gonna finally have a product, this is great. And I don't mean that as in finally, like it's a first step, that's fantastic. Thank you very much for the brief yet very informative update. Any questions or comments from Mark from the board, committee? Okay, great, thank you so very much. All right, moving on, subcommittee reports. Mrs. Gaines, you're reporting out from the legislative breakfast.
Yes, that was, well, the superintendent and I attended the legislative breakfast hosted by the Massachusetts Association of School Committees. Is that correct? Yes. And I'll do a very quick, short report here, I guess, on my words. But all the representatives were there, all the state reps, which was very nice to see. I think there might have been one that wasn't there and sent an aide, which was great. But it was a really great dialogue. And it's interesting to see, you know, in this region that we have so many similarities and things that we are challenged. I mean, affordable housing. We talked for a long time about affordable housing. And, you know, particularly after our budget discussion and talking about with Chatham and the, you know, the families and, you know, Harwich having the families. So I talked a lot to other school committees and some of the things they were facing. We also had a good conversation about families who struggle financially. We talked about the year-round economy and how that's been, you know, really challenging for some of our families, which leads to a ripple effect into domestic violence, stress levels, teen pregnancy, drug and alcohol abuse. I mean, so it was just a really good conversation about some of the challenges that various districts are having. Childcare, of course, was a big one. The other thing I wanted to note, not that this affects us, but I found it very interesting. Nantucket, for the first time, I guess in the history of this whole region, their kindergarten class is going to be majority minority. And I thought, wow, you know, and that was something else that we were talking about, just the diversity and some of the lack of diversity here in this region. And it was really nice to be able to hear that from Nantucket. So lots of conversations. Scott had shared with me, which I did not realize, 13 languages we have at Harwich Elementary School. You know, so there was just such a good dialogue, and we were talking about the diversity and how things are really changing in this region. So it was just a very, very good time. I mean, did you pick up anything? I really liked being able to connect with the legislators. I thought they were very open. They did actually say that breakfast, they take what they hear from that breakfast and they go back and the legislation that they work on considers that. Like the Student Opportunity Act, they were talking about that, and all of the stuff from the year before that was discussed went into that. So anything that you want to add?
I just appreciate, you know, our legislators who we most work with are Sarah Peak and Julian Sear, and just how accessible they have been to us. I know that Sarah was at the table with Tina and I, and it was just an all-around great dialogue. And you know, just I appreciate the support that she, you know, gives us as a school and you know, individuals that have reached out to her. I was just sharing with Sarah that my son had reached out and sent Sarah an email earlier in the school year, and she you know, communicated right back right back to a 17-year-old who was trying to get her ear. You know, it's like I just, you know, appreciate that we have that type of legislators in our community.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Gaines. Thank you, Dr. Carpenter, and thank you for attending the breakfast. That was excellent. And moving on, superintendent's report.
I think you all have heard from me more than enough today. I just, in your packet, I'd like to just thank Leah for finalizing this. Every year we, you know, produce a school attending children's report that involves us, you know, reaching out and contacting every private school on Cape Cod and every, you know, parochial school, and just to identify where do all of the children in Harwich and Chatham, you know, whether they're with us or not, where are they in school? And you know, just some of the highlights, for better or worse, that I just want to point out. So one of the things I asked Leah to put onto this that we haven't had before is just changes, you know, 1 year changes, which are the last 3 columns. It has, you know, number of Harwich, change in the number of Harwich children, the number of Chatham children, and just the total number. You know, so in terms of students attending parochial and private schools, that's down 4% over prior years. And I think that's a general trend. You know, when I was doing the budget presentation, we're seeing more and more of our families wanting to be with us here at Monomoy. One that that may change, and I don't necessarily consider this a great thing. I am a huge proponent of technical education, and I am very proud to have Cape Tech in our town, and that, they're building and will be opening a new building. We actually are seeing 13% less of our students heading off in this last year to Cape Tech. Again, I think once that new building opens up, that may turn around, but I do think we have to continue to work with Cape Tech, because I do think that it's the right choice for some students, and we need to go and make sure that we're helping families connect with the right, ultimately, secondary education for their children. Two big highlights that were definitely embedded in that budget presentation. If you look at Lighthouse Charter School, number of students attending Lighthouse Charter School in 1 year, down by 34% in 1 year. That's a lot less money that's heading out the door to Lighthouse. And then something we can be extremely proud of, in 1 year for Nauset, 24 fewer kids heading off to Nauset. That's a 17% reduction in 1 year of the families that saw Nauset as a better option than what we're offering here.
Didn't like that commute, did they? Woo. It's a drive.
That's it.
All right, great, thank you very much.
Madam Chair, I
Yes,
just want to
Ms.
make one comment.
Yes.
I just want to say to the superintendent, I really appreciate the relationship you have with Cape Tech. I just wanted to say that publicly, because Cape Tech is a very special school. And, coming from the DC area before I guess 7 years ago now, it's not a school that's in a lot of regions, which blows my mind. So I just wanted to say, I really appreciate what you do to really recognize when that school is the best option, for some of our kids. So I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, and I've shared this before with some of you. One of the most heartbreaking conversations I've had in my time here is there was a young man when he was early in high school. Somebody who was concerned about him in the community brought him by my office in Chatham, and I love just sitting down and having the conversation. He's a student, an EL student, an English language learner student, and I was asking him the exact same question I ask a lot of teens. Sort of like, any idea where you want to, what you want to be in the future, and I just told him, in all honesty, it's like if you ever need something, just call me up. And a couple years after he graduated, he called me up, and it was like out of the blue. And he's like, you might not remember me, but I stopped by your office, and he starts to talk about, like, I didn't know what I wanted to do then, but I know now. And what he was sharing is, that he wanted to get involved in one of the trades that was at Cape Tech. And, it's one of those things that it's like you're just wishing, that there was some way you could have gone back in time and just said, okay, let's try to go on a different path, because I was very limited in how I could steer him towards an option that that now he had some clarity. And it's tough. Sometimes you've got kids that are coming out of 8th grade, and we're asking them, what do you want to do in your future? And my daughter wants to slam the door in my face these days because she's in 10th grade, and I'm asking her routinely. It's like, so what do you think you might want to be? Because that'll help focus what sort of colleges we might look at. And I get it. She doesn't know yet, and that's 10th grade, and here we're asking 8th graders to go make a big decision on their future. And so I do think we need to work well at helping students come up with what is that right option for them.
So along that line, I'm just asking, I know that Cape Tech did have a program for high school graduates. Do they still have that program?
They don't. They don't now. It's something that I'd love to see us get back to to a place, and I think I think there's ways to, I think if either Cape Tech or for that matter, Upper Cape Tech, we're interested in developing a program. And I think people need to understand how the tech schools are funded, so they have a separate assessment that they give to the town. So, so when students go off to Cape Tech, the tech schools are assessing the towns the exact same way we are. So there, in my off-Cape life, there was an option for students who had graduated to have sort of a postgraduate year. But you can imagine that the tech school, had a funding mechanism, and you would have to have, in this case, select boards that were willing to go pay, for a fifth year of high school.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Dr. Carpenter. And at this time, we actually have included a second option for public comment. And again, speakers are limited to 5 minutes, and additional time at the discretion of the chair at this time. Yeah, and at this time, if there's anyone like to speak, I would just ask you to come to the podium, and Leah has put a piece of paper and a pen, if you could just sign your name there and tell us what your name is. Charles?
I'm really appreciating this second public comment section of the school committee meetings, because I'm finding things do come up in the course of a meeting where there may be some information or experience that could be shared and maybe a possible relevance. One is on the area of the school calendar. At least 25 years ago, the district that I spent my entire career in, teachers negotiated with the school committee a contract which did call for wording in the contract for the start of school to be centered around Labor Day. And basically the wording was that if Labor Day were to be falling on, say, 5th, 6th, and 7th, I don't know the exact dates, but one of the later dates, then school would open, and there would be a date in the contract of what would the earliest possible work day be for teachers. And then on other years, school would open after Labor Day, when Labor Day falls early. And that has worked, held, and stayed over all of these years, and seems to be working well for, always worked well for families, from my perspective. And it sounds like you're going into negotiations this year. Would it be really nice to have something like that worked out, like right at the beginning of next school year, because as the superintendent pointed out, the following year, it's a late Labor Day as well. So my thinking is just, it seems to be there's a lot of consensus among the teachers to go that route of an earlier start, which is a late Labor Day. Perhaps the committee could work with the teachers, maybe at least work out. I know negotiations can sometimes last a long time. We've had that experience, but perhaps a memorandum of understanding or memorandum of agreement could be worked out, which would enable the school committee to make some early output to the families so that they would know for the subsequent year when school was going to be starting as early as possible, because we're facing another late Labor Day. And then, if you finally work that wording out, parents are always all set, at least for the start of school into the future, because they know, depending on where Labor Day is, here's where school is going to start, either before or after, and at least settles that. Now, there was some discussion at the last meeting about somewhere down the line possibly looking at other more dramatic changes in the school calendar. But those are, and for those, I suggest, discussions start really, really early and give people a long, long heads up, much more so than is done now, dealing with calendars in February that are going to affect the following school year. So I just encourage to keep working towards letting parents know at the earliest possible date what the school calendar is going to look like, or at least for the beginning of school year. And the second area, didn't know there was going to be anything on about Council on Aging in Chatham on this meeting. I want to just share some experience I just looked at as I was sitting there at the maps in the projected area. As a grandparent who spent 2 baseball seasons, middle school baseball seasons, spending a lot of time on that baseball field in recent years, you should know that an awful lot of foul balls are hidden. I didn't hear this, I bring it up only because it wasn't part of the discussion, and I may have a unique observation, having been there for almost every middle school baseball game that was played there for 2 years, but it's amazing how many balls, there are no barriers to stop that. So perhaps somewhere down the road, if you voted that as surplus land, there'd be an issue that may crop up between schools' baseballs being hit into the parking lot of the Council on Aging lot, and maybe somebody would have to deal with barriers, and how are we gonna deal with that? Would that be the school department? Who's responsible would that be? Just that observation. Second, I hope the committee, from my experience, would never call surplus land the existing parking lot down there by the basketball courts. It's not part of this discussion, but hope never down the road, because that lot was always filled for every middle school baseball. In fact, there weren't enough spaces in that lot, and people would park in areas they probably shouldn't have parked in. I have gone both ways to the baseball field as a grandparent. I've gone from the back of the school and made that hike up the hill, all the steps and across, and I can tell you that I see parents and grandparents attending games who could not make that walk.
Yes.
And my wife, until she had her knee surgery, would never be able to make that walk and see our grandson. And I do at least see people with physical challenges climbing the hill, which is manageable and much, much closer to get to the baseball field from that parking lot that currently exists. So I just did want to share those observations while they're fresh in mind. The issue may never come up for years and years, but there you have it. Thanks for this second public hearing. Hopefully that's of some help.
Thank you, Charles. Maybe we should charge for stadium seating for the baseball
Yeah.
game. Are there any other public comments at this time? All right, great. Anybody? All right, perfect. Seeing none, we are going to adjourn into executive session pursuant to MGL 30A, Section 21, to discuss strategy with respect to union, non-union contracts. Coming out for adjournment only.
So moved.
So moved. Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Roll call?
Yes.
Aye.
Yes.
Yes.
Aye.
Aye.
Yes.
Motion carries. Meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone. 8:59.